Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this rulemaking advisory committee. We'll just wait one more minute to see if anyone else would like to come into the room. Reminder, this is a December 10th, 1:30 p.m. rulemaking advisory committee for stacked and attached duplexes or two-family dwellings. So we will begin shortly. I am Ian Pake, analyst with the division, and on the call as well, we have our structural program chief, Tony Rocco. Good afternoon, everyone. The purpose of this rulemaking advisory committee is to assist the Building Codes Division in considering a rulemaking to make interim amendments to the 2023 Oregon Residential Specialty Code, or ORSC. This rulemaking advisory committee is intended to discuss consideration of using existing paths in the 2023 ORSC to create a new path addressing stacked two-family dwellings being connected to other stacked two-family dwellings. We look forward to hearing the committee's feedback on the issues outlined below. So a little background before we get into our three issues today. At the October 2nd, 2024 Residential and Manufactured Structures Board meeting, Structural Program Chief Tony Rocco outlined the division's outreach and work considering this proposed rulemaking. This rulemaking is intended to discuss consideration of using existing paths in the 2023 ORSC section R302.3 to create a new path addressing stacked two-family dwellings. The division is looking to further support the available developable housing options under the application of the statewide ORSC, and the division is proposing a new configuration that marries popular current design choices. These two popular existing design choices are townhouses and two-family dwellings. This code solution is intended to meet the stated industry desire of simpler, small footprint apartment-type designs being available, while the division supports our governor's housing initiatives and related statewide housing production goals. The approach is intended to accomplish this while still accommodating simple designs, easy to follow prescriptive provisions, flexible options, and reasonable levels of fire and life safety. Currently, our concept is to allow stacked two-family dwellings to be attached to other stacked two-family dwellings, or essentially zero lot line two-family dwellings with increased fire separation at the vertical demising walls between each stacked two-family dwelling. Again, also on this call is our structural program chief, Tony Rocco, to help outline some of the technical aspects of our proposed rulemaking. Tony, is there anything you'd like to say before we go into our first topic today?
I don't think so, Ian. Thanks for the introduction. I mean, I think the idea here is to take a look at the provisions that we have. We think that they're pretty thorough. They've been through a rigorous internal review. And we're trying to leave them as simple as possible, right? So instead of maybe looking at the old Appendix O task force work and the townhouse, the Oregon specific townhouse amendment language that we're all familiar with of R3022, we're trying to be less prescriptive here and be a little bit more flexible in the language while still addressing all of the requirements, such as dwelling fire sprinklers, the fire separation, accessibility. Once we get into 4 or more units connected within a single building, whether or not they're separated by firewalls, etc. So that's kind of the premise here. And again, I mean, we're welcoming feedback. That's kind of the purpose of this exercise. So thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you, Tony. So our first topic today is should the division create a new path addressing stacked two-family dwellings being connected to other stacked two-family dwellings, and is the proposed pathway sufficient? Particularly, we'd like to discuss the division's consideration of using existing pathways in the 2023 ORSC R302.3 to create this new path. Does anyone in the Rulemaking Advisory Committee have any initial thoughts on this discussion topic? If so, please unmute yourself and State who you are and any affiliations. Particularly, we're interested in whether or not the pathway would sufficiently balance fire life safety, feasibility, and potential cost effectiveness, while also meeting the needs of industry and the division's statewide housing goals. So any comments on that particular balance would be very helpful. Seeing and hearing nothing on our first topic, we'll move to our second, but again, we have a comment from Jody. Yes, we do have a proposal of the interim code language. Tony, would you be able to share your screen with that language?
Sure. Yeah, I can share my screen here. I can just walk through real quick. So just simple. It's a very simple approach here. We're kind of mirroring stacked two-family dwellings with townhouses. And so what you see here up front first is an adjustment to the scoping language to capture these stacked two-family dwellings as independently, uniquely defined as proposed, in accordance with the appropriate subsection in R3023. Limiting them to 2 stories above grade plane and height, which is unique, right? Because the remainder of the scope of the ORSC is not greater than 3 stories above grade plane and height. So that's something to ear note there. Then we go down to the definition in 202, a vertically stacked two-family dwelling where one of the dwelling units is located above the other dwelling unit. For those of you that are familiar with not only the 24 IRC, but also the coming 27 IRC, they do have some language down this path for stacked two-family dwellings. And so we took some of that, could have melded it into what we have for our definition here. And then what we do is we roll into another subsection within 3023. Again, 3023, of course, for two-family dwellings within the ORSC. And this subsection 30233, specific to the attached stacked two-family dwellings, we get right into them being permitted to be attached to other stacked two-family dwellings in accordance with this section. And then also noting that each stacked two-family dwelling shall independently comply with the applicable two-family dwelling requirements of section R3023 and the requirements for townhouses in the code. Each stacked two-family dwelling shall be considered a separate building. So very similar to other townhouse provisions that we're familiar with, right? We see that same language in R302.2. And then again, pointing out that attached stacked two-family dwellings are not required to comply with 3022. So the intent here is that up here, this was a late add that our team caught, is that throughout the ORSC, we have unique requirements for townhouses, in particular lateral bracing requirements. We have some seismic provisions that all of you are familiar with for townhouses located in seismic design category C. And so what we were trying to do with this language is capture that these attached stacked two-family dwellings must comply with all those other provisions for townhouses throughout the code, except for those Oregon-only amendments in 3022. And again, this language is just intended to kind of be in its, it's not 100% perfect here. We're just trying to get it to the point of the rack discussion. But so that's kind of what that exception is there. We played with a bunch of different configurations. This seemed to be the most clear, according to our team. Then we get into the unique requirements for the attached stacked two-family dwellings. So one, we have stacked two-family dwelling separation. And all of this is just taken specifically verbatim from the model IRC for townhouses. So instead of, again, reverting back to Oregon-specific kind of more prescriptive Appendix O task force work for townhouses that we know of in R302, we turn to the model IRC and took the provisions that we have there for townhouses. So we have the ability to do double walls, common walls, instead of what we're familiar with, common and modified walls. We don't have those unique kind of Oregon only solutions. We still have very similar language in the model code, such as electrical installations being in accordance with the electrical code, and then the common wall shared at the demising line shall be constructed without plumbing or mechanical equipment, ducts or vents, other than sprinkler piping, of course. We have continuity provisions, the default construction requirement for the demising separation to terminate at a parapet, which is exactly what we know of townhouses. Parapet construction, we also get into structural independence. So again, just stuff that we're all familiar with, nothing unique or made up here. This is just model code language. And then we touch on accessibility, and we revert to section R320, which is already there as a placeholder. We'll touch on that right at the end here. And then automatic sprinkler systems. So where we have 3 or more stacked 2-family dwellings attached and separated in accordance with the provisions, each stacked 2-family dwelling shall be protected throughout with an automatic sprinkler system defaulting to a dwelling system. This should actually be 2 or more, where there are 2 or more. Oh no, 3 or more is correct. So the trade-off here was that basically the whole idea of this concept was there's been a lot of discussion about doing basically low-rise, small footprint, small number of unit apartments under the ORSC. And instead of getting into this discussion about, what book gets out of and what code standards we refer to from the OSSC to the ORSC, we're just talking about looking at another product that is reasonable to construct under the scope of the ORSC, stacked, again, 2-family dwellings, which is already under the scope, separating them similar to townhouses, or as Alana has described it pretty accurately, is basically just townhouses with an upper and lower unit. And so what we're looking at here is that the trade-off is if we have 2 attached stacked 2-family dwellings, so a total of 4 units, there is no sprinkler system being required. We did a bunch of outreach to local government partners ahead of kind of putting together this proposal. A large number of building officials replied that they weren't comfortable with not having sprinklers being required at all for these kind of unique configurations. And so the trade-off is you can do 4 total units without sprinklers, and then once you exceed that, so once we had, let's say, 3 attached stacked 2-family dwellings, so a total of 6 units, then we'd be into minimum requirements for a 13B system. So that's what you see there in 302.333. We kept the utilities language. That was some of the feedback we received from local government partners, was that they wanted to see very similar parameters to what we have on the townhouse side in R3022 regarding utility separation. So utilities serving an individual stacked 2-family dwelling shall not run beneath, through, or otherwise be attached to a separate stacked 2-family dwelling. So very similar language, again, to what we have for townhouses. And then just a reminder, I think this is something that's missed quite often for townhouses, is the application of Appendix K. And so we just added a pointer here about sound transmission and a reminder for folks that, yes, you do have to still meet Appendix K when we have multiple attached dwellings or dwelling units. And then back to that pointer for accessibility, in R320, we have the attached stacked 2-family dwelling title here. And this is just a reminder that, once we have 4 or more in a single building, a non-elevator building, the ground floor units would be covered under our statutory charge in ORS 447-220 to align with the Fair Housing Act. And so that's really what the intent of the language is here, is just to remind the folks that are applying the code provisions that we do have to have type B, Bravo type B units on the ground floor minimally. And then, of course, if you had a great number of these, you could potentially get to maybe some additional requirements there, or you had an elevator service or something like that, kind of unique, then you would have additional covered units upstairs as well. So, and that's it. I mean, it's 2 pages of code provisions. Again, trying to keep it very simple and just come up with another solution. Like I said, the initial feedback from local government partners, we did quite a bit of outreach, as well as from builders and developers, was overwhelmingly positive, just supportive of having another product solution option under the ORSC, so under that simpler residential path. So hopefully that helps. Happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tony. Is there anyone in the RAC that has any questions for Tony on this idea or the proposed interim code language, or any comments on the amendment's possible impact on the balance of fire life safety, feasibility, and potential cost effectiveness? Thank you, Tony. Seeing and hearing none, we'll put a pin in that and move on to our second topic, the potential fiscal and economic impacts of this rulemaking. With any rulemaking, the division is required to make particular note of the potential fiscal and economic impact that might result from these new rules. The division is requesting input from the committee. Oh, one moment. Jody, yes. And David.
Hey, sorry, this is Jody Orrison with the City of Portland. I had a couple of questions more about the implementation piece rather than the concepts behind it. I don't know if you wanted me to just run through my questions. It's about 5 questions. One was about the 2 stacked units next to each other. And I think the language right now talks about adding a third will require sprinklers. Is it the intent that you could add single unit townhouses to those sides and not trigger sprinklers? So you'd have like the 4 and then kind of continue on with single units?
Great question, Jody. Thanks for that. No, so there was a lot of discussion about that. I don't think on a site specific alternate method or something like that there would be any reason to prohibit it. But this concept was just having stacked 2-family dwellings attached to other stacked 2-family dwellings, kind of similar to how we have townhouses. Where you can't do currently you couldn't do a one townhouse with an ADU down below. We've had a lot of questions about that, adjacent to 2 other townhouses and still be, complying with the townhouse provisions. So that was the concept initially, was to not allow anything other than just stacked 2-family dwellings next to another stacked 2-family dwelling. But again, open to feedback. That's, the purpose of the text.
Okay. I'm not sure that I would have read that sprinkler code requirement in that way at this point. I don't know if there's something else that's citable in here that says you can't mix 2 stacked 2-family dwellings with townhouses, or not. And maybe it's in there. This is the first time I've seen this language. One of my other questions was about, do they have to be stacked above and below? Could they be side by side? I guess they couldn't use this section, but is there any reason why that's less safe, or is that alternative method only?
No, yeah, you can do that currently right now, right? So stacked. So if you had a side by side 2-family dwelling, you would just have a 0 lot 2-family dwelling that's side by side. The uniqueness here is that they're stacked and then attached to another stacked unit. Whereas, if you did a side-by-side 2-family dwelling, you'd have, a 1-hour wall in between them, assuming that you didn't have a real property line separating the 2 units, and then yeah, you could just deal with it like a 0 lot, where you're using, R302, R302.1, and just using, a 1-hour wall on each side of it. So you basically already have a codified path to do that when they're side by side.
Hmm. Okay, I think this seems like it opens up the option to not actually have those be exterior walls, right? Like they're a townhouse wall instead of the exterior wall, but let's pass that on. Um, is there anything that talks about how that upper unit exits? Does it have to exit to the exterior, or is there anything in here that talks about, and this might coincide with one of my other questions, common space? That's something we see a lot with all of the configurations that we get under our code guide option for this that requires sprinklers. I understand this is going to make it so that you can go a limited way without the sprinklers, but that's one of the pieces that we've come across, is that there's a lot of common space negotiations and exiting, the top one kind of exiting within the envelope, but separated from the lower one. Is there anything about this set of configurations that speaks to either common spaces or to exiting not to the exterior?
There's not, other than what we have in our 311 already, right? So each dwelling unit has to have an independent means of egress.
Okay.
So we know that. And so, yeah, so if there's any proposed, language you want to throw together for common spaces or something that you're seeing a lot in the city of Portland, welcome it.
I think even with townhouses, we do rest pretty frequently on that mixed occupancies piece, where if you've got, and that's the 30222, where we say, no, you don't get a bike room that serves all 4 units. That kind of a thing is what we're seeing. So if we had something about that somewhere, but I can look at some language. And I had just one more, and I appreciate everybody letting me run through these. Which is, are there any public access requirements for egress or the emergency escape rescue openings that needs to be addressed? Or does the current code language work for the configuration options? Like, is it the intent that even when you start having multiples of these 2-family stacked dwellings, that will just be able to use what we've got currently in there?
We talked a little bit about it. Great question again. Our conclusion was that what we have currently is suffice. It will suffice for the design. And so remember that we had that kind of we were realigned with the model code initially on the using the minimum 3 foot wide unobstructed path from like from a bounded yard in the backyard where the ERO opens to a bounded yard in the back. This was specific to townhouse designs. We had a lot of pushback on that, and then we went back to the board to have that repealed from the ORSC. And that was really the one thing that kind of came up was like, okay, well, what if they have bounded yards and we have this configuration where they're egressing it, or the ERO is opening on the emergency escape side, not the rescue side, to a bounded yard. Do we have to have like we're dealing with that same type of provision again, the unobstructed 36-inch wide pathway? And our conclusion was no, we didn't. We have enough language already currently that deals with it. There wasn't anything that was unique in our minds to open up to new language on that. But again, we're welcome to if there's anything you want to put together and propose, more than happy to take a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Is there anyone else in the rack that would like to comment on topic 1 before we move to topic 2, the potential fiscal and economic impacts? Seeing nothing in chat, we'll move on to our discussion of topic 2. With any rulemaking, the division is required to make particular note of the potential fiscal and economic impact that might result from the new rules. The division is requesting input from the committee on the nature and extent of any fiscal or economic impact that might be caused by this rule. Some examples of potential fiscal or economic impacts would be, are there any additional costs or requirements on local municipalities, on particular types of businesses? Will the rule require additional training to implement, comply with, or enforce? Will the new rule make particular actions or products more or less expensive? This is not an exhaustive list of examples, and any thoughts on possible fiscal and economic impacts, positive or negative, are welcome. Do members of the committee have any initial thoughts on possible fiscal or economic impacts of this rule?
I'll go ahead and comment on that. I have a question about if they're going to be type B units underneath, and we're reviewing these under the residential. Our residential plans examiners and inspectors are not certified to look at ADA requirements. And have you considered that in all of this?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Good question. So there was a little bit of talk about that, and probably would defer to Alana on any final determinations about that. But the initial discussions were that we would train on it. We would train on type B units. We would train on what's required, and that it would fit then under the certification, right? There's nothing that prohibits them from being included in the low-rise dwelling code. And if this was a portion of those structures, similar to what we already have for townhouses, right? If we have 4 attached townhouses, one of which is a single story, then we're subject to Fair Housing Act for that single story unit, and then you would be subject to type B unit minimally for that unit. And so that was the initial discussion, is that we would do training on it so that we could again streamline this, make it as efficient as possible, so that we don't have to have an A level just doing plan check on just the type B, or just doing inspections on just the ground floor units, and try to fit this under the ORSC application and applicable certifications.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any other comments on the potential fiscal and economic impacts of this rulemaking, positive or negative?
This is Jody with the City of Portland. I had one clarification question that does affect the fiscal piece of it. My understanding is it looked like you said each of these could be their own building. So we would expect if you have a series of them, that each stacked 2-family dwelling is a permit, and we're not trying to fit 4 dwelling units under a single permit under the residential code.
Yeah, good question, Jody. So you have some flexibility on policies and procedures of how you permit things locally, but correct. So the concept here is just like townhouses, just like each townhouse is a separate building for the purposes of code application in R3022. The same application would hold true here, is that each stacked 2-family dwelling would be treated as a separate building for the purposes of application of the code. And that was really based on utility separations, kind of the independence of each one of those units, and then also to fit them under the standard for 13D, right? Because each one of those now is just a 2-family dwelling. We're not dealing with apartments per se. And so it kind of was working with all of those parameters.
Okay. All right. I think that was one of our significant fiscal concerns, because our systems are not set up for more than 2 units under a residential permit. That's a significant technological cost to the City of Portland if we were trying to do that, but it sounds like we do not have to. It sounds like we can continue with what we've been using, which is our residential building permit that can include up to 2 units.
Yeah, and I think you have all sorts of flexibility there. So however it works best with your system and it makes the most sense for the customer and for your processes. I'm not aware of a citable path that would limit, the permitting otherwise.
Tony, this is David Wood, also in the City of Portland. In the chat, I dropped a question about whether these could be reviewed as structurally independent or dependent like townhouses. Thinking of applicants contracting for more than one building with engineers.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, David. Yes, so we do have similar language to what you find in R3022 or in the model code for townhouse provisions that identifies the structural independence and then what elements can be shared or where it can be structurally dependent. And so we were trying to address that. And so, yeah, I mean, there's going to be some probably some kind of problem solving on the approaches on how they want to design these. If, when folks approach them, if they're going to do them as either dependent or independent, but both of them would be an option as far as we see it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony, in chat, we have another question from Jordan Egbert. Quick question about if this could be fit in with the middle housing requirements.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jordan. I don't really know what that means. So middle housing, I mean, we do have some conversion rules, if that's what you're referencing, and that's for, converting existing dwellings into 2, 3, or 4 units. Yeah, so we already have those conversion rules existing. And so, yeah, in theory, once this is just like you could, in theory, convert an existing dwelling into townhouses, it would be very difficult. You'd probably have to have a pretty large dwelling, maybe in the west side up in Portland or something that you could convert into, three consecutive townhouses. You could probably do the same thing where you have attached 2-family dwellings, and kind of get down that compliant path. So we could take a look at those conversion rules, as appropriate, once we get this stuff in place. Hopefully that helps. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you, Tony. Are there any further questions or comments on topic number 2 from the committee? Seeing none, we'll move to our final specific topic before we will open it up to any additional topics for the committee to discuss issues that were not brought up. Topic 3 is what are the potential impacts on racial equity in the state? Again, with any rulemaking, the division is required to make particular note of any potential impact on racial equity in the state that may result from the new rules. The division welcomes any input from the committee on the nature and extent of any impact, positive or negative, this rule may have on racial equity in Oregon. Are there any comments from the committee on the potential racial equity impacts of this rulemaking? Does anyone in the committee have any comments on how this would be a positive or a negative for them in implementation or any racial equity impacts that they can see? Seeing and hearing none, we can come back to this. Now we'll move on to our final portion, which is the additional topics for you to discuss as a committee. Here is an opportunity for you to discuss any additional issues that were not previously brought up. It is also an opportunity for the committee to return to any previous issue that was discussed where you would find additional discussion or questions may be beneficial. Are there any topics that weren't touched on or people would like to go back to that the committee would like to address now? Seeing and hearing none, this will be our final call. Are there any additional topics that the committee would like to discuss or any topics they would like to go back to and discuss for this rulemaking advisory committee today? Seeing and hearing none, thank you everybody for your time. The division greatly appreciates your help on this potential rulemaking on stacked and attached duplexes or 2-family dwellings. Thank you.